So most of us have been watching Delicious in Dungeon, right? If you haven't, why are you here? If you are here to be told to watch Delicious in Dungeon, then this is me telling you to watch Delicious in Dungeon. But the continual reaction to this series over the course of its airing has had an extra bit of meta-entertainment for anyone who has read the original material. Under the assumption that people don't listen to me and haven't watched the show yet, what is it about? Well, largely it's about a group of adventurers who are delving deep into a fantasy dungeon. They run into and use various creatures for their food, despite that not being the norm and half of the party being disgusted by it. Only for them to then be horrified that everything our himbo protagonist and bearded hobo cook in this dungeon is actually delicious. This is what I mean by the anime being chill, fluffy, and upbeat. Yes, there are some more action-heavy and serious moments. I mean, they are in a dangerous dungeon, and it's not like the creatures are all that friendly. But every episode in the show's first half especially has this amazing balance of high stakes and then a massive cooldown period when our characters prepare and consume the delicious meal made with the corpse of the anime creature for the episode. There's enough balance to all of that, which makes it so that the audience, us, is never really worried at all. Sure, we understand the dangers, but there's enough meta information that leads us to believe the characters will come out on the other side of any altercation and then just have a delicious meal to boot. We aren't worried about them. There's nothing there that makes the viewing experience stressful. Look at all the funny situations that they're in. Let's laugh at the mental breakdowns our characters have. If that's all this show was, it's an amazing series. One that I'm still honestly surprised has taken this long to get produced, since the manga is over a decade old. Sure, said manga is still ongoing, so any adaptation that did occur over the last decade would have, by necessity, needed to end without a proper resolution, and then there's a chance that since the manga seems to be winding down now, that the whole thing might end up being animated, but also, I mean, like, anime existing for the promotion of a manga that either ends or ends decades after the original adaptation is nothing new. But not all anime gets new life in a new adaptation like, say, Fruits Basket. Heck, Hunter x Hunter was popular enough to get a second adaptation, but now we've gotten to the point where if that one ever decides to continue, we'll need another third adaptation since the second is over a decade old itself. But if you have been watching this series, as I have heavily hinted that you should, by now you'll know that the upbeat nature of the show's narrative is not all that's there. Beneath the exterior of the fluffy surface is a rich and dark taste of something quite a bit more sinister. Because, though, we are going to be briefly talking about darkness, about tragedy, and about reflecting on decisions made that honestly make things worse for those involved, I wanted to introduce the sponsor of today's video, BetterHelp. BetterHelp is a service that connects people, specifically you, with licensed therapists who are trained to listen to you and give you advice on things going on in your life. Why would you need that? Because, speaking from personal experience, living in your head when things go wrong is terrible. It can send you spiraling, latching on to assumptions about yourself, about others, and overall, just making your experience living in this world a terrible one. And it doesn't have to be. Now, you could go and you could find a friend to talk to, maybe lean on your parents. But if you find yourself in a situation where you need to talk about something and you either don't have those types of people who you are close enough to, or you get anxious, like I usually do, about dumping your problems onto someone else and instead just not wanting to bother them with your problems, then finding a third option is always preferable to doing nothing at all. An additional perspective is useful, and sometimes all you need is a way to just vent out what is happening to you so that you can hear it out loud in your own voice. It's something that's helped me a lot in the past, especially when I haven't been the best on wanting to work on those things about myself. So something like BetterHelp could definitely get you headed in the right direction. To use their service, you can head over to my link, betterhelp.com/glassreflection, answer a few of their questions, and that should put you in touch with the right kind of help. You can do that from virtually any electronic device as long as it has internet access, and you can use it for like a voice call, a video call, or even just messaging. BetterHelp currently says that they can get you matched up usually within 48 hours so that you can get talking to someone relatively quickly, and all of this can be done within the comfort of your own home. It's always possible that you might need something else, something in person, perhaps. But if you are like me, you are an anxious mess and don't like to bother people. So you might find this far easier than, trying to go and talk to your GP and go through like hoop after hoop after hoop to get in touch with someone in real life. Even if that is eventually what you have to do, I am of the mind that doing something, taking that first step, is for the best. And this might be for you. If you use my link, too, there's also a 10% discount attached to it, so it might help financially as well. Links will be in the description, and again, thanks to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. Now, let's get back to how interesting the meta side of this show has been for readers of the manga. I am reminded of stories told about how the original viewing of Game of Thrones went. Now, Game of Thrones is not an anime, but we're going to go with it. It was, until its ending shat the bed, an immensely popular series, a series that was always more popular than the books that came before it. Because of that, there was a particular part of the story where everything changed. It's called The Red Wedding, and when it happened, when it was adapted into live action, so many people were shocked because of the amount of conventions about the genre that this show just flipped upside down and onto its head. But the changes wrought by it were not completely unexpected. At least not for those who read the book and knew what was going to happen a whole decade in advance. How long did I say the Delicious in Dungeon had been around for in manga form? Fancy that. The depth of the narrative changes to Delicious in Dungeon really don't strike until episode 13 in the anime, but things actually started, for those paying attention, in episode 12. The party has spent the entire narrative up until this point chasing after a giant red dragon who devoured our protagonist's sister back in episode 1, with the hopes of using magic to revive her. That plot point was kind of like a Chekhov's cannon that everybody saw, but we were all gaslit into thinking that it wasn't actually there because, hey, look at all these kooky situations and all of the fabulous food. Let's forget that the reason any of the characters are doing this is currently being digested in the stomach of a giant freaking dragon at the depths of this dungeon. The narrative was so good at getting us to forget about the horrors that actually exist within our setting, the dark reality of what our characters are doing. And I personally believe that this was all planned, that it is a masterful way to not just have us experience a story, but to be subtly told how to feel about it, and then for all of us to fall for it. By episode 12, our characters, after a lot of struggling, have succeeded at defeating the giant red dragon, and after digging through the remains looking for the long-lost sister, they find her. Or rather, they find her bones. They are too late. She is unfortunately beyond the point that traditional resurrection magic would work. We've seen magic that revives people from the dead prior to this, but they are usually freshly killed and still have a mostly intact body to return the person's soul to. But that is not the case here. It's the first time that the series does not immediately try to switch to some quirky cooking scene to add levity and lighten the mood. Instead, the party's mage decides that our digested companion is so important that she feels it necessary to use forbidden magic in order to resurrect her body. And it's at that moment that anyone who's watched Full Metal Alchemist is now perched at the edge of your seat with the knowledge that, yeah, things are about to go south real fast. The tension is high. Our mage sets up her magic circle out of blood. She uses the dragon's remains as a catalyst for new flesh. And then she performs her ritual, which works. The sister, Fallon, is disoriented but resurrected. But since our mage is a believer that magic itself is not evil, only the users of magic can be evil, everything works out. The characters rejoice, and then, hey, we do get the usual swap to a cooking scene using the leftover dragon meat. The characters start to plan their ascent back out of the dungeon, and the tone seems on par for what the show has done before. The tension that was brought in by that forbidden magical ritual has seemingly dissipated. And it's at that moment, when everything seems to have worked out, when hope finally comes back in, that the shoe drops. Fallon is then controlled by the dungeon's master, as it uses her new dragon-fleshed body to control her actions. Not only that, but it really feels like the gist of the whole situation comes off that Fallon's soul is now trapped in this body, a body that has been commandeered back into the control of the dragon they once faced. She is, by all accounts, in a worse situation now than she was when she was dead. Because before, she was dead and could live on in the afterlife if this setting has such a place. But now, her soul is being used and abused, and the party that was trying to save her life are the ones who put her in that situation. Which is terrible. But I mean, we can still have delicious meals, right? To really explain what I think the author was doing here, I want to jump back in time and give an example from another anime that I feel like perfectly explains this situation and what I feel like the author was trying to do. And we're doing that using words from a deranged antagonist of a completely different show. In 2011, an anime aired that you might have heard of before. It's called Fate Zero, which, briefly, involves a bunch of historical figures with anime redesigns summoned for a high-stakes battle royale. The majority of its plot is unimportant for our purposes today, but what I want to talk about is the introduction of one of its antagonists, a character named Castor, who is summoned to the world by his master after said master invaded the apartment of a young family and killed the parents as a sacrifice for his summoning, leaving just their young child as an offering to the newly summoned servant. Castor is a character who we learn, eventually, is quite mad and deranged, but he's the scary type of insane where he can appear perfectly reasonable, cheerful even, and sane when he wants to be. In his introduction, he apologizes to the young child for the situation involving his family. He releases the boy's bindings. He urges the boy to run away and find safety somewhere. But in the moments as the child starts to leave, the second that the boy has hope again and thinks that he can escape, that is the moment where Castor drags the boy away with shadow magic and devours him whole. He explains that the hope he gave the child made him all the more delicious. And this is how I view the writer for Delicious in Dungeon. Set up this world and these characters. Make it light, make it cheerful, make us not pay attention to the signs. Gaslight us to forget the dark side of the show's narrative that has been made clear to us from the start. Give us hope for a happy ending, and right when we and the characters themselves have that hope, snatch it all away. Because wouldn't that make it all the more delicious? So that's it for our show today. Watch Delicious in Dungeon. A thank you to my patrons who make it possible for me to do this sort of thing and give me the ability to feed myself, especially to patrons like Ross Emerson, Hector Montemayor, Aiden, Siri Yamako, Raifan Bonaparte, Sailor Arashi, and Omar Shobin. We can't continue this without your support, so however much you are able to help, I am eternally grateful. And until next time, ladies, gentlemen, and others, watch more anime and stay frosty.